I never thought you would be a mom. I thought you would be the tia that all the kids loved, but she never has her own kids. I can't picture you with kids, and Edith's not a kids person. Those are some of the things that I've heard throughout my life. In this episode, episode 2, I want to pause and talk about intention and really the importance of pausing and setting intentions. Welcome to Cultura Convos, episode 2. Cultura Combos is a space for stories and reflections of identidad y cultura, meant to educate, meant to inspire you, and spark those hard conversations with ourselves, with others too. More importantly, though, with ourselves first. Through personal reflections, stories, and conversations with other guests, this community is forming to help you become the best version of yourself by writing and rewriting your story from a place of strength instead of embarrassment, instead of shame, instead of fear. And our goal here is that you begin to embrace your cultura, your cultural identity, and also remembering that no one identity defines you. My name is Edith, and in today's episode, I'm specifically sharing a reflection around my decision to become a mother. And this episode is so important because whether it's motherhood or something else, we need to really pause and go after what we want. Set intentions. There is this saying that one of my professors when I was in grad school said, he's like, en Mexico siempre dicen que si quieres hacer a Dios reír, dale tus planes. That doesn't take away from the importance of setting intentions. And I believe that it is important to be intentional. Decisions are not always easy. Sometimes we're stuck in the go, go, go. We just do what we see others do. And we don't really stop and ask ourselves if that's what we really want and if that's the life that we want. So there are so many things that we can be like, one day I'll do this, one day I'll do that. And that one day might not come if you're not intentional. And that is what today's episode is about. Just pausing, checking in with ourselves throughout our lives, making those moments to pause. And then for those things that keep coming up in our heads or those things that we constantly say one day, one day, one day, actually pausing to, make a plan or be more intentional, even if it's not a super detailed plan. I feel like we all go through life a bit differently. And what I'm learning is that simply leading with purpose. As I mentioned, I want to talk today about becoming a mother. All right, so becoming a mother. So currently I have a daughter that God the Most High, the universe, my ancestors blessed me with. This year we celebrated her first year, and it's been a lot of things. Really, really amazing. I would say overall, it's been really fun. I've also been blessed to primarily focus on being with her. And, even in moments where it feels like I want to do this, I want to do that, like ultimately, I think of the long term and I am happy that I can stay with her and focus on her in this moment. And God knows how long that will be. Back to the stories. Even though I was that person that said like one day I'll become a mom, like one day I do see myself as a mom, I'll say things like that. The more that life passed, I realized that I would say that, and at the same time when I thought about all the things that I wanted to do, I didn't necessarily visualize a baby in it. I started thinking of that more and more. Really, I don't think I thought of it too much other than, yeah, one day, like, yeah, I can see myself like one day having kids, or yeah, one day I'll have kids. I've been with my partner for a long time. So at some point when we started having the conversation, I want to say that he brought it up. And I remember he brought it up. I don't know if this was the first time, but it's my recollection of the first time. We were living in Waltham, Massachusetts, which is outside of Boston. We were in a couch. We had a little red couch and it was a tiny apartment. So literally my computer was like in the sala next to the couch. And he was like sitting down and he started talking about, kids and how he was ready to have kids. And in that time, I was finishing grad school, so I had to be at least in my mid to late 20s. And I remember thinking, no, like I have school. Like, no, like it was very easy to say no because it was like, oh, when I finish school, maybe when I finish school, we could talk about it again. Because in my mind, I definitely wouldn't want to have a kid during grad school. I also thought about all of the other things like, dude, I'm just literally have like a part-time job and you're also working like 7 days a week. Like it just what you say versus kind of life right now in a lot of ways, it just didn't really make sense in my head again. So it was kind of like, okay, we'll just talk about it at some point again. And I'm sure we talked about it here and there and I kind of would just like brush it off. Like, no, like after grad school, it was, oh, I want to get some experience with work. I wouldn't want to finish school and right away like have a baby. And then after, grad school, we were living in Boston for another couple years. And yeah, it just was like I was working. I didn't necessarily see myself with the baby. At first, I was working in a campaign, which is a lot of work. And then, I was working in another nonprofit. So it was like, now I want some experience. And that's basically how it went. I probably had conversations here and there. However, another pivotal point was when, well, 2 points. Number one, I had a friend that asked me, if I was planning to have kids. And I was like, yeah, yeah, I can see myself like having a kid at some point, but I haven't really thought about when. Her response was like, well, you know what? Like, look into it because sometimes it can be very easy to allow our careers to, you know, take over. It could be really easy to just kind of let it go, like go with the flow in that sense and say one day. And then when you do feel like you now want to like pause or you want to make this decision, maybe you're not able to have kids, right? And that's the other thing too. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to have kids. I hadn't tried to have kids at this point. So whether it was like age, whether it was like, infertility of any way, mine or my partner's, like those were all unknowns. My mind wasn't even there yet. It was like even making the decision of do I want to try. So she talked about freezing eggs. And at some point, I was like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. Maybe I could freeze my eggs. Like, I remember I came home like really excited. Oh my gosh, Marcel, like, I hadn't even thought about this, but you know what? I just realized like we could freeze eggs. And that way it could be like right when we want, even if it's a long time from now. And he's like a very direct person, which is like, really awesome. Sometimes I really, really hate it. I don't know how many friends I have that would tell me things like straight up like that. Marcel is like my best friend. So he basically looked at me and was like, absolutely not. And maybe he didn't say it like that, but I do remember it was very much like shut down my whole excitement. And again, it's a love and hate. I went online and I started doing research. What would it take? What does it mean? How do you do it? And ultimately for me, I quickly like my excitement went down. I thought it was like simple. And it turns out it's a whole investment of like time, energy, financially. And for me, the thing that did it was the process. Once you're ready to continue or attempt that pregnancy, like what it takes on your body and like the whole process. And for me, it was like, wait a minute, if I have the opportunity to, you know, have a baby and I don't have to freeze my eggs, then I much rather choose that for myself. So that was like the main thing that was like, actually, I wouldn't necessarily want to do that if I don't have to, just because I want this like control over when, right? So that basically was one of the pivotal moments where I was like, okay. And it was like a deeper conversation that had me thinking. Another pivotal moment, and this is when I made my decision, was when I was having a conversation with Marcel. I believe I had a therapist at the time, and yeah, if I believe I actually brought it up how I would basically like get really stressed or anxious having the conversation about having a child. I can't remember if I brought it up to her and then Marcel and I talked, or Marcel and I talked and then I talked to her. The thing is that I was sitting down on the couch, Marcel was like cooking. It was a small apartment in Atlanta and it's like those open concepts. So, I could see him cooking as I'm sitting in the couch. And he basically brought up children again. And I started telling him that I felt like I wasn't sure. Every time I thought about having a kid, like I feel like I would get really anxious because I would think that, my life is gonna stop. Everything's gonna pause. This was the big one that I was like, I just feel like women, we just take way more of the work and like you get to do all these things, or I don't remember how I said it, but really like the responsibility of the woman. and then also financially. And it was just all these things. And when I said the women part, he's like, okay, so how many women do you have in your circle that are moms? Like, what women are you thinking about? Because I was specifically sharing, I have these dreams, I have these goals, and like, I feel like a baby would stop all those things. And that was like part of it. And then he's like, how many women do you have around you with children, or like what women are you thinking when you think of those things? And the more I reflected, the more I realized that I started kind of naming names, like obviously my mom. And I realized in that moment that I had internalized motherhood based on like these really three close relationships that I have. And I realized, like, wait a minute, these women, I love them, and they're in a positive situation now. I also saw the early stages of having a baby really, really young. And I was like, wait, they were all teen moms, which means that the situation was different. And I'm not a teen anymore. I realized that my whole life I had heard my mom say, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant. And, it's almost like, wait, like I succeeded at that. I didn't get pregnant. Now I'm at an age where, and I've been at an age where if I wanted to, I could get pregnant. So it was like a combination of like, kind of putting myself in the shoes of other people, because that is what I had seen motherhood be and some of the challenges that come. And I had to realize that that wasn't my situation anymore, that I was in a very different stage in my life, spiritually, mentally, age, financially. And that reality wasn't necessarily going to be my reality. And even if I had had a kid at a different age, we all go through our own experiences. And then also realizing that, ultimately, when you want to do something, whether it's goals I had or dreams, it's like you will do it, you will get it done. Yes, it might take longer. Yes, it might look different. At some point, I was sharing with a therapist about some ideas I had and things I want to do, including some, things around getting closer to my roots in Mexico and things like that with the group and all this stuff. And when I was telling her, I said something, I give an example, like, sometimes I have ideas like I want to, go to Mexico for a few months and like, collect stories or film or kind of do like a short documentary. And, if I have a kid, like, when is that going to happen? And then she made a comment, okay, so you're telling me you wouldn't be able to take your daughter and have her with you, and maybe you just like put her in a little carry on and then just do what you got to do. And when she said that, I'm like, first of all, I kind of like that little image. I was like thinking of like myself with the little, how they do it in Mexico sometimes with the little like rebozo, and you put it, the baby in the back. It made me really, yeah, if you want to do something, you will do it. Obviously, there was always going to be like things you give up in the moment. And one quote that's been really resonating with me that I heard recently is like, you can have everything you want, but not all at once. Something like that. I heard it in a podcast. I can't remember which one or who said it. And anyway, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking of that because when she said that, I remember smiling and being like, yeah, that's true. Like, I would still do it if it's something that I truly wanted, because I have all these ideas. And then it's like, okay, which ones am I actually going to be intentional and realize, you know what, I want to do this for me or for the service of others, as opposed to just like, oh, it sounds cool. And I say I want to do it. And then when I look into it, it's like, never mind. It's not really aligned with what I actually want to do. I just thought I did. These moments is what ultimately, got me thinking, because Marcel, that conversation I had with him, he was like, okay, let's sit down and really unpack this. And that's when he asked me those questions. And it was like very pivotal moment. I'm sure I got a little defensive in the moment. I remember as a very positive conversation now. I'm not going to lie, because I feel like I probably got defensive. What happened next, though, is really, really important, because essentially it's when I really took that pause, not just in that conversation, also the next day. I remember I went on a long walk, and it's interesting because the more I reflect, I realize that long walks without headphones, just walking, have been like pivotal for me. It's where I thought about the idea of what story I want to write first, and it became Two Homes, Dos Casas. And it's also where I decided to become a mother. So I was going for a walk, and I was like talking to myself out loud. And I was voicing like, why, like, why don't I want to have a kid? And I started voicing like, I feel like it's going to hold me back. I feel like, financially, it's a lot of money. Kids are expensive. I was listing all these things. And then I thought about it and I'm like, okay, 5, 10, 15 years from now, if somebody was like, oh, wait, it's so, why didn't you have kids? Like, what, you know, just having like a real raw conversation with someone or like, I don't know, being interviewed, something like that. Like, why, like, what made you not have kids? Or why did you decide not to have kids? I'm like, I wanted to focus on my career. It was too expensive. Those things, especially the career one, they didn't sound right to me anymore. When I voiced it out loud, I realized, you know what? That's not what I want, actually. If anything, I do want to create something with this person that I love so much. Like, if anything, I do want to create a family. And and that was what made the decision easy for me, because there are hard decisions. There's decisions that are hard to make. Whether it's like go with your gut, like do what you like, go with your gut is one, right? We often hear like go with our gut. And I personally believe it takes practice to really be able to understand what that means, to be able to understand yourself, or understand kind of like the feeling, like, is it my gut, is it my ego, is it something else? And for me, it was easy to make the decision once I voiced it out loud and I thought about it long term from now. You often hear it never feels like the right time, because I think it's because it's such a big decision and there's so much unknown, right? For me, as I was walking, just talking to myself, and then I thought about it long term, looking back, voicing that I did have a kid felt more in alignment than saying I didn't have a kid because of my career. And that's when I decided I was open to motherhood. I was like, all right, God, I'm open. And of course, I wasn't sure what my journey would be like in the pregnancy part, whether I would be able to conceive. And I know that, it's definitely a challenge for many couples, whether it's the women, men, both. And I'm really grateful that I was able to conceive and give birth to my daughter, which I didn't know her sex until she was born. It definitely was not as planned, because I had like a planned home birth and we ultimately had to transfer. I'll share a story perhaps maybe another time. It was a very long at home birth and then very short, intense birth in the hospital. We didn't know her sex. And yeah, we're just very, very happy that I was healthy, she was healthy. And yeah, I'll have to do another episode, because there's so many things about motherhood that there's a lot of things people talk about, there's a lot of things people don't talk about. So yeah, for me, like thinking long term ahead, looking back made it easier, and not necessarily like planning 5 years ahead or 10 years ahead, because sometimes for me that's still very challenging. But it was more like, if in 5, 10, even 15 years somebody asked me like, oh, why didn't you, I realized, like, for me, I actually did want to create a family. And the more I reflected over time, the more I realized it was a lot of things. My mom saying, don't get pregnant, like, no te embaraces, no me haces ser mensa. She would even make comments like scare me about the delivery process. And actually, that was my biggest fear. I actually don't know why I didn't mention that. But other than the career, money, women doing more of the work, the actual delivery of having a baby tripped me out. And I know part of it is, one, you in novelas, it was always extreme. And my mom also like always described like, te van a tener una pata aquí y luego te abren la pata bien fea otra allá. And it was just like not a pretty visual. And yeah, no. I'm thinking of like how actually I was hesitant when I got to the hospital and they were like trying to like, put me in position. So anyhow, so yeah, that was a big thing. All these things you hear about being a mother, I will say, if you are thinking of, even if you're not thinking of, I would say, but definitely if you're thinking of or are already in that journey, I took a couples class, and it was amazing, because literally it was all about mental first, and then they explained the process. And part of it was like rewriting that narrative about motherhood, because when they went around in the room and they asked, what do you know about motherhood, right? Like, what scares you? I remember I said, like, the delivery part of it scares me, and everything I know about, like, giving birth is literally what I saw in novelas or in movies, or my mom explaining the pata aquí, the pata allá. And then somebody else talked about their fear of getting, like, ripped and torn. And there was just so many things that we had to go back, and the facilitator did an amazing job at saying, you know, rewriting that narrative of motherhood and remembering that our bodies are amazing, our bodies are powerful, that not every pregnancy looks like the novelas or movies, that there is just so much more. And I don't want to position it or frame it as this, like, oh my gosh, only beautiful thing. It's not only that. There's a lot of layers and everybody's story is different. What I do want to say is just reframing and defining, like, even motherhood for ourselves, because I had been defining it as what I saw people do or what I thought I had to do. So I'm trying to be also intentional with doing what aligns with me based on where I'm at in my life in this season, my values, etc. So I'll pause there. I'm sharing this because I feel like whether it's motherhood or something else, but definitely motherhood for sure, in the sense that a lot of us are, you know, the first or second in our families, to go to college. We're the ones, pursuing our careers, having this privilege to pause and say, what do we want? Like, what do we want? Our parents did so much. We come from, like, people that have done so much for us to be here, and to be able to ask ourselves these questions is such a privilege, such a blessing. At the same time, being those first in our family for many things, it could be so easy to just go, 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 focus on our career, focus on all the things we want to do, and then almost like put it to the side, never get to that one day, and then realize this is something that you really want. I believe the more I'm learning, the more I'm listen to different stories. I do truly believe that ultimately, regardless of the decision we make, the universe, God, is working in our favor. I am truly believing that more and more. This is a story that I wanted to share in a reflection, so that if there is something in this moment that you've been saying you want to do, you pause and ask yourself, do I really want that? Do I not? And if so, what's a step I can take towards it? And maybe you realize, you know what, it's really not what I want, or maybe not in this season. That is my goal. And because I feel like motherhood is such a big topic, that is one that I think many of us women, if we have that privilege, that option, asking ourselves can be a huge, huge decision, and a beautiful one. The importance is that we have these conversations with ourselves. We don't really know what our journey will be. However, we do have control over many things, so we can focus on the things we can control. I know, easier said than done. Another thing that this taught me is really questioning what we hold as truth. So other people's truth is not necessarily our truth. Like, other people's reality is not necessarily our reality. And with my situation, about hearing people say, Edith is not a kids person, or I can't picture you as a mom, etc. For example, my sister with kids, she can be very, like, loving and giving, right? We grew up, I remember she used to take one of the kids with her all the time, with her girls at the time. And I didn't necessarily do that with any kids ever. So my mom used to say, like, oh, she's a kids person, Edith is not. And I think, I always, like, heard that, so I internalized. At the same time, there was, like, some truth to it, in the sense of, if I walked in a room, I wouldn't necessarily, like, jump for a baby. I might not even notice the baby was there, to be real. But again, we are in different seasons. I feel like now with my daughter, one, I love her so much. I also notice how many kids there are in the world. And now that I have my daughter, I'm around a lot of kids. And now with my book, Two Homes, Dos Casas, that's actually been a really great highlight of my book, where, when I get kids that are, I would say, like, 3 and up, and they just love the story, and they make the sounds when I tell them to make certain sounds and things like that. So that's been really, really fun. So I'll begin wrapping up this episode, and want to highlight some things that have been really helpful for me and may be helpful for you too. Or if there's something else that, sparked your mind, a thought, definitely dive into that. For me lately, what I have noticed is that certain hard questions become easier when I think of them 5, 10, 15 years ahead. Looking back, there are some hard decisions I have in my list too that I haven't necessarily decided yet. I think it's an ongoing journey though. So I think that like certain things will become clear in different points. I do value time more than I did now. And I was already on this journey of really being intentional with my time. And I know I throw this word and it's easier said than done. However, I think pausing often is what allows us to have intention and really listening to ourselves, our body. I say that about time because I have been really surprised with motherhood at how easy it is to say no to certain things. There was a lot of things that I had to miss last year, very important things like my goddaughter's quinceañera. And at first I was like, yeah, I'm going to be there. I'm going to fly one day and leave Amina with milk and come back the other day. And then it was like the closer I got to it, and once she was in my arms, it was like, as much as I would have loved being there and I was sad to miss it, I knew that I had to stay home because my daughter needed me. And, she was a month. But that was my thinking before and then after. I also had a coworker that shared something so important with me when I let her know I was pregnant. And she said, don't let the planning consume you. Enjoy your pregnancy because it goes so fast and we can be so caught up in the planning and what are we going to do and the nursery and this. And she kind of joked, literally the first year you can have your baby in like a big drawer, just like sleep in there, put a little comfy blanket. I can see why she said that, although that's not necessarily what I did. I did cherish that advice and I didn't let the pregnancy, the identity of now I'm pregnant, consume me. Yes, there were hard moments for sure because of everything your body's going through. At the same time, it was great in a lot of ways. And not allowing one identity to consume you applies to so many things in life. And I've been trying to be intentional with that, not allowing one thing to consume me. I read this in Atomic Habits. It's a really great book in a lot of ways. And I'm paraphrasing, but the author talks about it, how we identify can be so critical, right? So, if you say, let's say, I'm a baseball player, and then you get injured and you can no longer play baseball, like it really messes with you because that is such a big part of how you've always identified. Versus, and I don't think this is the exact example they give, but versus, let's say if you go into your why, like, why do you play baseball? Like, why did you, like, why do I love stories and storytelling and learning people's stories? And it's like, I play baseball because I love to stay active, or I play baseball because I love using my body, be challenged. Whatever it is you make up, it's so different than, identifying yourself with that sport only in that specific role. And so reframing that is really important, remembering that there is more to that identity. And I know with motherhood, we internalize so much about what motherhood is, what is based on. Those are three things that I've learned and I think about as I share that story. And I hope and I pray that something was helpful to you. In this episode, I talked a lot about motherhood. And as I said, whether it's motherhood or something else, the important thing is that we pause. We pause, we make those decisions, we define things for ourselves, and we really allow ourselves to sit with certain things. It's also not always going to come so easy. Thank you so much for listening. I am excited for any thought, any comment that you may have that surfaced during this reflection, whether you're at home, in the car, cooking, watching it on YouTube with a friend. I pray that you enjoyed this episode and that it was of value to you. And if so, feel free to DM me, whether it's on Instagram, it's Edith Suarez, on LinkedIn, and really share it with a friend. Share it with someone that you think this episode will be very helpful for. And if something serves for you, I invite you to lean into that. to think about it a little bit more, to reflect about it a little bit more, whether it's in a walk or in a journal. And thank you so much for listening. If you have not, you can definitely subscribe and leave a review, which is super, super helpful. Thank you and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Adios.